Welcome to Healthy Births, Happy Babies, where we share tips, tools, and stories grounded in natural childbirth and parenting principles, so that instead of feeling overwhelmed and confused during this exciting time in your life, you feel safe, supported, and empowered in your childbirth and parenting journey. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jay Warren.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm the prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here at the CAP Wellness Center. And today's guest is Laura Shanley. She's the author of the book Unassisted Childbirth, and she's quite the authority on just that. She herself had 3 births at home unassisted, which means that she did not have any kind of medical provider present at the birth. It was just her partner, and a friend or two, depending on which birth it was. And, this is definitely a topic that's different than what we've had here on the podcast before. Most of the advice or the information that we're getting from our guests around childbirth is either advice about a more natural, unmedicated birth in a hospital setting, or maybe a birth center, or maybe even a home birth. But we've never ventured into the realm of what that looks like to have an unassisted birth. So she herself, Laura, will be telling you she doesn't think that an unassisted birth is for everyone, but I think after you listen to her conversation with me, you'll understand more about the natural process and how arriving at that kind of decision does not seem as crazy as it might seem when you first looked at this title of this or first listening to this interview. So we're going to switch over to that conversation very shortly. But first, let me, as always, turn to have a message from our sponsor, the CAP Wellness Center.
Hi, I'm Maureen Higa, and I'm the acupuncturist at CAP Wellness Center. One of the things I love about working at CAP Wellness Center is getting to be around all the brave, strong, and inspiring women. I'm always inspired by my patients' ability to rise to their challenges, overcome obstacles, and also get creative in their pursuit towards their health goals. I feel honored to be part of their journey, whether it's helping them to start a family, have a healthy pregnancy, or helping them through their postpartum recovery.
All right, and I want to say thank you, too, for all the rates and reviews that are coming in through iTunes. If you haven't done so and would like to, if you're getting value out of this podcast, going over into iTunes and rating and also giving us some feedback as a review is really helpful for us. It helps expand our reach in iTunes, as well as gives me good feedback about how things are going for you. And as always, you can email us at info@capwellnesscenter.com if you have any questions about either this episode or upcoming topics or previous topics that we've had. So now let me introduce our guest, Laura Shanley. Laura is an author, speaker, and childbirth consultant, widely recognized as one of the leading voices in the natural birth movement. She's the author of Unassisted Childbirth, which is in its 3rd edition here in 2016, and maintains a website dedicated to promoting natural childbirth called unassistedchildbirth.com. Her expertise is frequently sought out by television and movie production companies, and she has been featured in media outlets such as ABC News, 2020, The Doctors, The Discovery Channel, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. She also works with women on a one-on-one basis, providing childbirth counsel and emotional support before, during, and after pregnancy. So now let me switch over to my conversation with Laura Shanley. Hello, Laura. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jay. Nice to be here.
Yeah, well, it is nice to have you and for you to talk with us and share your wisdom on this topic of unassisted birth. I know for the majority of our listeners are hospital birth oriented people, but they're wanting to learn more natural methods of doing so. And in the course of learning that throughout their pregnancy, they're coming, maybe not necessarily that our goal is to get them out of the hospital by any means, but to have them be incorporating those things in the hospital if they're switching to a different provider, doing it at home or with a midwife or possibly even unassisted. And I know the principles that are sound to you are really important for every woman to hear. So we heard your bio and all the amazing outlets that you've worked with and shared this message. But before we jump into the topic, tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you get interested in this topic and become such an authority and so passionate about unassisted birth?
Okay. Well, I actually was not interested in birth at all. Never thought I'd have children. Grew up, I remember hearing my mother talk about the episiotomy, and I was like, okay, that's it. No babies for me. And then I met my husband to be, now my former husband, when I was 18. I was at the University of Colorado, and he was also a student there, and he had become fascinated with the evolution of self-consciousness. He started reading books about it, and he had started reading about birth trauma and how our first experience really sort of sets the tone for future experiences. So if you come into the world afraid, that this sets you up for other fearful experiences. You sort of brace yourself, and you view the world as a fearful, dangerous place. And so he had come across Grantley Dickread's book, Childbirth Without Fear, which a lot of people are familiar with. Grantley Dickread, he was an early natural childbirth pioneer. And Grantley Dickread was all about the fight-flight response, which is so well known now. But it made such total sense to me. And what Dickread said was that birth should actually give a woman a feeling of exaltation, and it shouldn't be the most painful, dangerous experience of her life. And that if a woman can have a birth that is where she's truly relaxed, then the baby won't be afraid, and we can avoid birth trauma and therefore avoid so many of the problems that many of us experience throughout our lives. And so this was really intriguing to David, and he told me about this book on the night that we met. So I'm an 18-year-old college student, and he starts explaining to me about fight-flight, which I know most people are already aware of it, but I'd like to just briefly say, because it's so key to my message. And what Dick Reed explained is that when a woman is in a state of fear, she sends messages to her body telling it that she's in a dangerous situation, so she either needs to run from the danger or fight the danger. And so blood and oxygen flow away from the uterus and into the arms and legs so that she can run or fight. So what Dick Reed says is that the uterus of a frightened woman in labor, which most women are afraid because they've been taught that birth is inherently dangerous and inherently painful. So he says the uterus of a frightened woman in labor is literally white. So because it doesn't have the fuel it needs, birth becomes painful and problematic. Babies get stuck. So he says if we can truly relax and understand that the same consciousness that knew how to grow a baby, an egg and a sperm into a human being, knows how to complete the process, if we will truly relax and not interfere physically or psychologically, the babies can just slide right out. It doesn't have to be this pushing and panting and struggling. And so this was just so intriguing to me. I really liked how he explained it. It made such sense. And I remember I started reading the book, and I literally felt maternal feelings surface in me for the first time. Like suddenly I was like, I want to be a mother. And around that same time, I also started reading books about the power of the mind. For me at that time, it was the Seth material, Jane Roberts, and then eventually I would get into the Abraham material. You create your own reality, the law of attraction, just that our thoughts and our feelings are much more powerful than most of us realize, and that we are all writing our lives. Basically, we're imagining our lives into existence. And I started having success with various aspects of my life, creating things that I wanted to create. And so my husband and I decided, well, let's have a baby. And why, if we believe that we create our own reality, then why should this be this painful, dangerous ordeal? Let's just believe that everything's going to go well. We're not going to interfere physically or psychologically. We were big fans of belief suggestions or affirmations and had found those to be powerful. We had been studying fear, shame, and guilt, and how just what those emotions do to our bodies, which we can see, say in shame, your face turns red, blood is rushing to the face. So our emotions affect our bodies. Your face turns white when you're afraid because the same thing's happening. Blood and oxygen are flowing away from the face so it can flow into the arms and legs. So we thought, okay, well, if we are going to create this birth that's going to be empowering and wonderful and safe, then why are we going to bring somebody in like a doctor or midwife? We will just have to then explain to them that, we know what we're doing and we trust, I trust my body. My body is responsive to my thoughts. And so we just decided, let's just do it ourselves, because we didn't feel that we wanted to. We thought it would be too problematic to try to teach somebody else. And I already had somewhat of a mistrust of doctors. I definitely feel there is a place for doctors. I grew up in a very medical family. My father was a physician, my sister was a labor and delivery nurse, and my mother did medical research. So I felt that doctors have their place, but in birth, from what little I knew about it at the time, and I really didn't know a lot about medicalized birth at that time, it just didn't feel to me that I wanted someone there telling me what to do. I really viewed birth as more of a sexual, spiritual experience, and I felt that if I could just get myself into a relaxed state, that I really felt my baby would just fall out. And so during my pregnancy, I just worked with myself to eliminate fear, shame, and guilt. I worked on approving of myself, approving of my body, basically just, self-acceptance, self-love. I feel that these are very powerful. When we truly love ourselves, we love our sexuality. We're not ashamed of our sexuality. So I would say belief suggestions. I did a little bit of visualizing. I worked with my dreams. In the beginning of my pregnancy, I dreamt that I was in a hospital giving birth. My father was there. I was in pain and I was having problems. By the end of my pregnancy, I dreamt that I was giving birth easily, and so I went into labor one afternoon about 3, and I can't say that the contractions were completely painless, but it wasn't anything that I couldn't deal with. I never checked dilation. To me, this idea that every woman has to be 10 centimeters dilated, regardless of her size, regardless of the baby's size, I just think it's one of these things that we're trying to fit this creative, artistic act into something. We're trying to make it mathematical, really, and with count to 10 and 10 centimeters dilated. Michelle O'Daunt, who wrote the foreword to my book, who actually volunteered to write the foreword to my book, which I was thrilled about. And for those who don't know, he's a French obstetrician and midwife, he calls himself. And he says, imagine that you are making love and everything is going beautifully and the energy is just flowing and you're happy. And suddenly someone comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Excuse me, what's your social security number?" And it brings you out of your creative, artistic mind and into your rational, critical mind. So that's why even when to have a midwife standing there and saying, "Okay, well, now we're going to check you to see how dilated you are. And now if you're 10 centimeters, then you have to push, or, we're going to even just check for heart tones." It's really, it's like, okay, we're going to check you to see how close you are to orgasm. And so even the most non-invasive midwife, to me, felt at that time, and I continue to feel this way, for me, it's an intervention, just having the presence of someone there. And then when they bring with them their rules and regulations, I think, it changes the experience. And so we ended up having a great birth. I just pretty much let myself labor. I never checked to see how dilated I was. I never timed my contractions. My husband was there, and 3 friends and a filmmaker, and all of them were male. So it was me and 5 men, which is unusual, but like nurturing, loving men that just genuinely were my friends, and they were the ones who wanted to be there. So basically I was just hanging out, letting myself labor, and I was sitting on the toilet, which is kind of my place to be in labor, and suddenly I felt my baby's face at my perineum. And so years later, someone said, "Oh, a face presentation." And I was like, "Oh, yeah," but I didn't really think about it at the time. And then I didn't tell anybody that I felt him there, but I thought I better get over to the bed. And so I walked over to the bed, and the filmmaker stepped aside to let me through. This was a man who was interested in what we were doing, wanted to film it. He turned off his camera, let me through. I got on the bed. I was about to turn over because I thought I'll give birth on my back, because that's how I thought it was done. And I heard a voice say very clearly, "Don't turn over," an inner voice. And I didn't turn over. I just stayed on all fours, and John just came flying out, and my husband David caught him in midair. What Michelle Laudant says, this is a fetus ejection reflex or response, that there is a force that will propel your baby out if you're not inhibiting it by triggering fight flight. So then I was really hooked on this. I was like, wow, this was such a life-changing experience for me. It was like so thrilling, so empowering, and it just felt so right. And so I went on to have my other babies that way, and then decided to write about it. And I actually approached Michelle Laudant's publisher at that time, Bergen and Garvey, and I said, and my message back then was, I had never thought of the term unassisted childbirth. I just was thinking, okay, you can create a better birth by working with your beliefs. And, oh, by the way, we didn't have any doctors or midwives there. To me, that was kind of secondary. The message really was about empowerment and believing in your own abilities and allowing your body to work the way it was designed. And so, but I approached a publisher, Laudant's publisher, and they said, we like this, write a book about it. And I had one going in my head, but I didn't have anything on paper. But I approached them, said, I'm writing a book. They're like, yep, we want it. And they titled it Unassisted Childbirth. So then I kind of ran with that. And now I've spoken at hypnobirthing conferences occasionally, which it's very similar to what I am advocating. So I'm not necessarily attached to unassisted childbirth per se. I think you can have a good birth with a doctor or a midwife, but for some women, having a doctor or a midwife there, along with their rules and regulations, is inhibiting. And so I think that's why it's important for each woman to say, okay, what do I feel comfortable with? Is it, when I think of having someone there, does that feel good? Does that feel reassuring? Or is it an intervention? Am I going to have to be telling them, you know what, I don't really want you checking me right now. My inner voice is telling me that I just need to be left alone, and I need to let my body work the way it was designed. So with an unassisted birth, you have that. You are free to give birth in your own time and in your own way. And that is important for some women. It was important for me. And with my second birth, he was a footling breech, which I didn't know until he came out. Mm. So, and I'm sure if I would have gone into the hospital, they would have tried to turn him, or, I probably wouldn't have even gotten to that point because they would have seen that he was breech, and maybe I just would have gotten a C-section. So, but in that case, I relaxed. I wasn't feeling any pressure from the head. I actually wasn't feeling any pain. The only reason I even knew I was having contractions was because I put my hand inside myself and I could feel my muscles contracting. But I just was standing there and a foot was hanging out of me, and I just said my belief suggestions that, I trust my body. I'm allowing my body to work, because I think so much of the time what happens with any birth, but especially with a breech birth, is panic. Mm-hmm. And people are panicking. And that, of course, what happens is fight, flight, then shuts off the flow of birth hormones, because your body can either produce stress hormones or birth hormones. So I didn't panic. I just stayed calm, and his foot got lower and lower, and then his other foot popped out, and then something just said the time was right, and I gave one push-pull and pulled him out. And it was like a 2-hour labor and just very easy. Wow. So I feel like all of my births, none of them have been textbook. There's been something about all of them. I'm not saying necessarily, a woman is never going to have problems. Problems can be had in any type of birth. But But I don't think that it should be blasphemous to say, I trust myself. I trust my body. I believe there is some consciousness that knows what it's doing, and that I think it knows how to complete this process if we don't interfere physically or psychologically. Right. So for me, the way to do that is to work with myself psychologically, to eliminate anything that might get in the way, any undesirable emotions, and then eliminate the physical intervention by not having a doctor or midwife there.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the whole like fight or flight response, that's why we're such big proponents of hypnobirthing. You know, as you mentioned already, we teach it here at the CAP Wellness Center. That's how Effie and I, we use that during our pregnancy for our baby being born. And it's all about like making sure you're out of the way and allowing nature to take its course. You know, it is the most natural thing in the world. And, you know, Michelle O'Donnell, when he was on the podcast, he kept saying over and over again, like, birth should be unobserved and uninterrupted. And Sarah Buckley, when she was on, was saying the same thing around that it interrupts physiological birth. And she kind of went into the whole birth hormone cascade, and just understanding that it's the most powerful thing in the world. And, you know, just even in physiological terms, I'll say to women, like, your uterus is in your body only to do just this, to grow a baby and to birth a baby. That's the whole reason why it's in your body. You know, it knows what to do. And I know that there's so much anxiety that can come up. And I think the work that you've done or did during your own pregnancies and now are teaching others to do is to really kind of work with all of those fears and bring them up to the light and let them dispel, so that they don't come into the birth and then, quite honestly, get magnified if you're in a danger setting, if it is a hospital or even a midwife. So tell me, what, during your pregnancies, do you see any kind of medical provider or a birth provider as far as prenatal care?
No, I don't. I don't go to doctors, you know, when I've always been very healthy. And so I suppose if I needed, you know, emergency care or something, I would go. But I've always had success with working with my beliefs. I've healed cavities in my teeth, you know, went to the dentist. He took x-rays, said I needed $1,000 worth of dental work. I kind of worked on myself. I waited a year. I went back and I visualized the holes filling in, and he said, what did you do? And he held up the x-rays and he said, here's where the holes were and here's where they're not. So I've had success with allowing my body to just heal and just be healthy, because to me, that's our natural state. So I feel, and I'm sure you've heard the term prenatal scare, you know, and to me, this is what, you know, you go looking for problems, often you find them. And maybe you're not even finding a real problem. But I got fresh air and exercise. I ate whatever I felt like eating. I didn't. And I've had someone wrote to me, or I met someone and she's like, oh, you're the woman that ate M&Ms. Like that was, she read my book. And because I said I ate M&Ms during my pregnancy, like that was the one thing that stood out to her, you know, that like, well, I ate, if I felt like eating sugar, I ate sugar. You know, I never went wild with it. I just feel like people give food so much power and they don't give enough power to their own thoughts and feelings. And so I believe, and it says in the Seth material, what you believe about what you eat is more important than what you eat. So, and I get all kinds of flack for saying that, but basically, if you're afraid of your food, you don't digest it well. You trigger fight flight, and that shuts down digestion, just like it shuts down birth. Your body is saying, now is the time to digest food, or is now the time to get this body out of this dangerous situation? So digestion shuts down. So I really believe that, back to your question of did I get prenatal care? No, I just took good care of myself, and most of that was mental. But I did get exercise. I lifted weights. I took walks, and I just to me, the future of humanity is really understanding the power of the mind, and understanding the mind-body connection, and that it isn't insignificant. And fight flight, I think fight flight so many diseases can be traced back to, if you turn on fight flight, you have to turn off something else. So normal bodily functions, normal things like even replenishing our bones and muscles. I've read about osteoporosis, and it isn't so much that as you get older, you naturally get osteoporosis. It's that years and years of triggering fight flight, it interferes with your ability to absorb nutrients. So you can be taking all the calcium in the world, and if you are triggering fight flight and that interferes with your ability to absorb that calcium, you can get osteoporosis. So I'm just fascinated with fight flight. And basically what I tell women is you don't have to know every possible complication and then how to deal with it. Some women do study that. That's not what I did. I really studied what causes the complication in the first place. So, and to me, the major problems in birth can be traced to poverty. If you are living in a war-torn country, if you don't have access to clean water and food and proper housing. Okay, so poverty, outside intervention, and inside intervention. If you can eliminate those three factors, then babies can come out very easily. So if we're living in a country where we're, the United States, where we, for the most part, have access to clean water and good food, and if we don't get in our own way and we don't let other people get in the way, then unassisted childbirth can be the safest way to give birth if you really grasp those three factors and how to eliminate them.
And if you look at things historically, assisted birth is relatively new, right?
Right.
And I know that a lot of people, when I bring up those kind of things, will say like, well, yeah, but the maternal death rates and the infant death rates were so high because of these unassisted births, and there isn't really any evidence that shows that that is any worse than what's already happening in our own country, knowing what our infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates are around the world. And so, it is something I've always said to every woman is the safest place for you to have your baby is where you feel safest.
Right.
And the most important thing is to have a team around you that is supporting you in the birth that you want. And so if that means you're safest in the hospital and having a doctor direct you as far as to create that safe space for you to physiologically birth your baby, fantastic. And if that means you need to be unassisted and not have anyone interfere it, then that's the best birth for your baby as well. And I think these principles are so important for every woman to listen to, and for the partners as well, so that the partners can support their that birth to happen the way that both of them want it to occur.
Right. And you mentioned birth throughout history. One book I found really valuable was Judith Goldsmith's Childbirth Wisdom from the World's Oldest Societies. And she studied 500 tribal cultures. And she said an anthropologist could observe a tribe for years and sometimes never see a death or a complication in a healthy tribal culture. So people think, yes, women and babies were dying left and right. No, they weren't in healthy tribal cultures.
Right.
But when the women were mistreated or the babies were taken away, Michel Odent goes into this. He said throughout history, birth has been interfered with. So you have tribal cultures that many of them believe that colostrum is bad for a baby. So babies are often taken away from their mothers immediately after birth. Sometimes they're given whale blubber and bread. The woman, they aren't nursed. The placenta can be retained. So there's so many factors. If you really take a healthy tribal culture where the women are treated well, throughout history, women and babies have lived. They have done well.
Right. Well, and so in our last minutes here, tell people how they can get in touch with you, learn more about you, and then also to pick up the new edition of your book.
Okay, so my book is called Unassisted Childbirth, and it's the third edition that came out this year. It's a paperback, and it's available on Amazon. Usually you probably have to put in third edition, or you'll get the other two editions, which are more expensive, and one is a hardback. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it through, there's a link from my website. My website is unassistedchildbirth.com or freebirth.com. Freebirth is another name for unassisted childbirth, and that was a term coined by Janine Parvati Baker. But it basically means the same thing, giving birth without doctors or midwives. Sometimes people have doulas there. To me, that's still an unassisted birth because there's no one medical doing anything. And I have a lot of information on my website. You can contact me through there. My email address is laurashanley@comcast.net. I'm always happy to talk to people. On Facebook, I'm facebook.com/Laura Shanley. And I'm still so passionate about this subject. My oldest is 38 and my youngest is 29, so it's been a while. My daughter is, who was a solo birth. I was by myself when I gave birth to her. She's 34 today. Oh. So today is an exciting day for me because that was just a fantastic birth. And but there's also other information on my site, lots of birth stories and articles. And so I'd suggest people Google unassisted childbirth. You'll find my page and other pages as well. And
I'll be sure to have the links in the show notes as well as on the webpage that we'll create for this podcast so people can click right into it, and especially to have a link to the Unassisted Childbirth 3rd edition, because as you mentioned, the previous editions being out of print and hardcover are different than the updated version that you just came out with. Was it this year or last year?
It's this year, and the other editions are still in print. They were published by an academic press, but this one is updated and affordable.
Okay, good. Well, the last couple minutes here, what's the major take-home message you'd like a woman listening to this to walk away with from our conversation? Whether it's something that we have already talked about that you want to reiterate, or maybe even something that we didn't have a chance to talk about.
I think that this is your birth. As a woman, this is your birth, and you have every right to say how you want to give birth, where you want to give birth, who you want with you. You shouldn't have to ask anybody's permission. I hear people say, oh, my doctor let me or didn't let me, or, no, you are the boss. And so unassisted childbirth is really woman-led birth. It's the woman trusting herself. And then, I think it's great when fathers can be involved too, and really just be supportive of the woman and encourage her to believe in her own abilities. That miraculous things can happen if you trust yourself, and it doesn't have to be hard. Fantastic. It can be very easy.
Good. And what about a message for the little baby? Maybe the baby hasn't arrived yet and listening to this podcast through Mama's belly, or maybe they have just arrived and Mama's listening as well. What little pearl of wisdom would you like to whisper into their little ear?
That there's no reason to be afraid to come out. I think women sometimes, they think, oh, I want to keep my baby safe within me, and it's a dangerous world out there. I've actually had dreams of being in the womb and hearing a voice saying, it's a dangerous world out there. You're going to have to struggle just to, stay above water. And so I think it's babies need to know that it's a good world. It is a safe world. This is a nice world. Yes, it has its problems, but it's safe. You are going to be loved. You are wanted. It's okay. Relax and trust and allow yourself to be born.
Beautiful. That's such a great message, and all of your wisdom today and your message is really powerful. I hope all of you listeners are taking it to heart and really exploring these principles if you haven't already, that birth is completely natural. This is your birth. Figure out how you'd like it to go, and then surround yourself with a team and an environment that's going to allow that to happen. So Laura, thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Jay.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information about this episode and other natural childbirth and parenting topics, please visit us at capwellnesscenter.com or message us on our Facebook page with any questions you might have. We here at the Cap Wellness Center look forward to helping you and your family be as happy and healthy as you can be.